Okay, so we'll start the shiur, and the should be the Ilui Neshama, and of course I join in condolences to Harold and his family. I today last week we spoke about the Arba Kosot. So today I would like to speak a little bit about Matzah. Coincidentally or not coincidentally, so the I spoke about this topic a few years ago. The and it was also a Zoom share. It was on the first year of the Corona that I spoke. So maybe it's because of the topic that's why we're on the Zoom. I don't know. I don't know what causes what anymore. But we talk about matzah, and I guess it sort of ties in because we we know there's so many themes, but what causes what? Where is the what direction do different aspects of the Seder or different aspects specifically of matzah, how do they turn? The reason why I that I say this is we'll start with a general observation, a pasuk that comes up several times in the course of the Seder, pasuk in the end of Parshat Bo, a pasuk we're all familiar with, mainly from the Haggadah. V'higata levincha bayom ahu lemor, ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li b'tzeti mitzrayim. That because of this, right? So God did this for me with tzeti mitzrayim. This is pasuk is found in the context in the Torah. It's the context of the what we would call the ben sheino yodeh lishol, where the Torah just brings us into vigata levincha bayom ahu lemor bayom bavur za'asa Hashem li b'tzetim mitzrayim. The midrash, which the Haggadah is based on, brings it back to the oh, wonderful, brings us back to the Rasha as well, and focuses on that word li velolo. We'll see if did you guys I don't know on my
Yeah,
phone whether it's for Efrat or for Yerushalayim. Did you just get a
it's for
warning also?
Yerushalayim. It's for Yerushalayim.
We
It's for
did.
Yerushalayim. It might be for both. But be that as it may, we'll see if we all have to go to the miklatim. I'll have to stop because I'm not in the miklat at the moment or mamad. But we will see how that goes. But in any event, the ba'avur zeh asa Hashem li, so that it appears there. We say it in a little bit later in the Haggadah when we say the Yachol Me Rosh Chodesh, and then that perhaps you could start. We would think that you would start the Haggadah, the mitzvah of the Seder, already from Rosh Chodesh, and in the end, Talmud Lomar Ba'avur Zeh Asa Hashem Li. Only when Matzah Marar Munachim Lefanecha, right? Not before then. So this pasuk is something which is we're all familiar with. But the question is, how do you translate the pasuk? Um, I grew up thinking the following: that why do we keep the mitzvot of the Seder? Because God took us out of Egypt. I think that for most of us, that's how at least we were raised. That's the idea. Why, when we were children and we were looking at the Seder and the Seder plate, and we were being told that the reason why we have matzah, the reason why we have maror, the reason when there was a Korban Pesach, all of this was as a remembrance for Yetziat Mitzrayim. And that is indeed the way that Ibn Janach, one of the great early Spanish commentators, explains it. And he's quoted here in the Ibn Ezra that that basically, just to look at the English side, because Hashem did this for me, right? That's how he understands it. That's why we're doing this here, because God did this for me. So that's why we have the matzot. However, the Ibn Ezra, and if you take a look, Rashi as well. I didn't put Rashi on the sheet here, but that they flip it entirely. Namely, that it's not because Ibn Ezra says "L'fi dati ein echad mehem nachon, ki eich nahafok divrei Elokim chayim." You're flipping the pasuk. The pasuk doesn't say ba'avur, right? It doesn't say ba'avur sha'asa Hashem li, right? That's why I have zeh. It says ba'avur zeh, because of this, God did it for me. So he understands the following. V'tama pasuk hefach machshavto. The understanding of the pasuk is just the opposite of what he and what I introduced, the way that we normally think of it. Ki ein anu ochlim matzot ba'avur zeh. We are not. It's not the Torah is not trying to tell us we are eating the matzot b'avur zeh, that we are eating the matzot because of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Rather, rak perush ba'avur zeh ba'avur zot ha'avodah shu achilat ha'matzah v'lo ye'echal chametz shu tchilat ha'mitzvot shetzivanu Hashem asa lanu Hashem otot ad she'otzianu mitzrayim. It's because of our fulfilling of mitzvot. In other words, if you ask,
we have a siren now. We have a siren now.
Too. So I will, we will hopefully convene in about 10 minutes time.
It's going out.
Okay. So after that slight delay, so we're back. But the idea that the Ibn Ezra is saying here is, and as I said, if you take a look at Rashi on the pasuk, he says the same thing. No, it's that we're not eating, at least because of that pasuk, Bavur zeh asa Hashem li. It's not saying that we are eating these items, the matzah, the maror, that we became the mitzvot because God took us out of Egypt, but rather it's saying that the reason God took us out of Egypt was in order for us to be able to be mekayem the mitzvot, which is and the Ibn Ezra points out that at the very beginning of the story, meaning where does Yetziat Mitzrayim start? With the story of the sneh, with the story of the burning bush. God tells Moshe explicitly, "V'hotziacha et ha'am mitzrayim tavdun et Elokim al ha'ar hazeh." The whole purpose, we have a mission statement. The mission statement is to kabel the Torah, to do the mitzvot. As we're thinking of it, as if you think of it as we do the mitzvot, because we're saying, what did God do for us? He took us out of Egypt, therefore we do the mitzvot. But if you're thinking of it from the other perspective, not from the perspective of our perspective, but from God's perspective, what's in it for God, as it were? Right? If we could say such a thing. What's in it for God is that we're going to be an Am that does Torah mitzvot. That's why it's worth his while to take us out of Egypt. So that's the idea when we're starting to look at all of the mitzvot, to be thinking of it in those terminologies, to be understanding that idea. So that's sort of just as a background, as an introduction, by way of introduction. But now, when we talk about specifically, why are we eating the matzot? Right, which probably for some of you, maybe even all of you, is you're thinking, well, what kind of question is that? But if you take a look at the Torah, so we see different themes that are being developed. So already at the beginning, v'achlu et basar b'layla hazeh. This is the very beginning this is Parshat HaChodesh. This is what we're going to be reading this coming Shabbat. And in those psukim, so God tells Moshe that you'll eat the meat of the Korban Pesach that night, Sli Esh, and here we have the first introduction of matzot. Sli Esh matzot.
Excuse me, I think you need to share the source sheets again. I don't see them.
Okay.
Thank you.
See. Thank you for letting me know. Hold on. See,
Oh,
am I still a host?
change
Yes,
host.
I can do a second.
You
So we'll
can?
start. I think I can. Hold on. Let's find it here.
Yes, you are a co-host.
Okay. Here we go. Okay, do you see it now?
Almost. Yes, thank you.
Okay. So the so tzli eshu matzot, I apologize. Tzli eshu matzot. So the matzot here are being mentioned as being part of the Korban Pesach. You eat Korban Pesach. How do you eat your Korban Pesach? You eat it with the matzot. You eat it al merorim yaklu, and you also, of course, eat it with the maror, which we'll come back to. The However, the Torah, a few psukim later, as you can see, I skipped a couple of psukim here. V'kacha tochlu oto, and this is the way that you're going to eat it. Lechem chagurim na lechem beraglechem makachem biyetchem va'acholtem oto b'chipazon pesachul Hashem. You're going to eat it hastily, right? Now, this is with regard to everything. It's not with regard just to the matzah. It's with regard to the Korban Pesach, with regard to the Maror. This is how you're eating it. Now, I'll just point something out. It's not clear that what does it mean, the chipazon exactly? They're only going to leave the next morning. They're eating it hastily and they're eating it with the symbolism of they're about to leave as they hold their walking sticks, but they don't know necessarily when they're going out. And indeed, they're not going to leave until, let's say, for argument's sake, 6 a.m. They're not going to be leaving at midnight. They leave in the morning. It's very clear from the psukim later on that Moshe goes, Paro goes to Moshe, and the Egyptians are pushing them out the door in the morning, not in the evening. Here, the chipazon is a sense of anticipation, the idea that you're about to leave, and that's how you're supposed to eat the Pesach and the matzah. It's also, of course, very important to remember that the story. If we just go down to the psukim, I'll come back to the psukim that I'm skipping here. Much later in the story, afterwards, here you could see I've jumped from pasuk Yud Zayin to pasuk Lamed Tet. So in the interim between Yud Zayin and Lamed Tet is the story of the Makat Bechorot and the actual impetus to move and to leave. And so here, as part of that, so that's when the dough is baked on their shoulders. Okay, much in the morning. It's not, but they're already eating matzot at night. They had made matzot for the Seder, what we would call the Seder. They had made the matzot for that Korban Pesach. And so now this is another another baking of matzot, which happens on their shoulder, and this is this is separate from what we had seen earlier. Now, I heard an idea once from, actually, very interesting idea, and it was in a podcast shiur from Rabbi Dr. E.T.L. Gold, who's a psychologist, and he was the shiur, was an alumnus of Har Etzion. The shivas in the Har, he would give for a year, about 6-7 years ago, he gave a series on psychology in Parshat HaShavua. And as part of that, and he was talking about this aspect of the Korban Pesach, he asked a question which I never thought before. And he just said, did the Jews know they were about to leave? In other words, did the Jews? I always said one of the biggest miracles, to my mind, of Yetziat Mitzrayim, maybe the biggest miracle, tongue in cheek, is that there were here 600,000 Jewish mothers, and no one made a sandwich. How is that possible? How is it possible that no one prepared for this journey? And I think the answer, and or at least his answer, which I think is a very plausible answer, is that the Jews didn't realize they were about to leave in the morning. They prepared the dough that they would make every day in order to bake the bread that they would bake every day. They had no inkling that they were actually going to leave right then and there. If you take a look at the psukim, which I'm not going to do now because of the time, but if you take a look at the psukim, God speaks to Moshe. It's not at all clear that all of this information is passed over back, pardon the pun, over to the Jews. Because they know that they have to make the Seder. They know that they perhaps have to be symbolically ready to leave, but they don't know when they're going to leave. From their perspective, maybe they're going to be leaving at noon the next day. Maybe they're leaving in 3 more days. All they know is that the Exodus is imminent, but how imminent, they don't know. And that leads to the baking of the matzah on their shoulders as they are Gigarshu Mitzrayim, as they are being expelled from Egypt. So as they're being expelled from Egypt, they're making the matzot. And let's not forget, they've already had matzot the night before. So that's something to keep in mind. The Ibn Ezra here, just to point this out, the Ibn Ezra makes a very clear distinction between these two ideas. So he says that on the pasuk, one of the pasukim that I skipped a little bit earlier, where it says V'haya hayom hazeh lachem lezikaron. So this day will be for you a memorial, a remembrance. Which day? Hayom hazeh. Which day? So it's unclear which day, because right afterwards it says Shivat Yamim Matzot Tochelu Ach Bayom Harishon Tashbitu Seor Bevatechem. Until now, we've been speaking about the 14th, that this is when they're going to shech the korban, this is when they're going to eat the korban at night. And now the Torah tells me that there's going to be a 7-day holiday, Chag HaMatzot, which is going to start on the 15th. So this Yom Hazeh that is being referred to, the Yom Hazeh, is that let me just change the color. Is that the Yom Hazeh, is that the 14th or the 15th? So it's a machloket between in the Mefarshim. The Ibn Ezra is very strong in this, and I think, sorry about that, the Ibn Ezra is very insistent on this, that it is the 14th. And here's what he says, and he makes a lot of sense in this regard, if I can get my computer to work. He says, Haya Yom Hazeh, Achar Sha'amar B'layla Hazeh, Shehu Yom Chamisha Asar, Amar Ki Hayom Hazeh Sha'amarti Lachem, V'lo Tziva Lishmor Chag HaMatzot Atah. So he said, this night, the Torah now returns to the previously mentioned, the 14th. Okay, in other words, the 14th is a holiday in of itself by virtue of the fact that it is the day that you bring the Korban Pesach. There, you see in the psukim that there is what we might call Chag HaPesach or Pesach. That's the 14th. And you have Chag HaMatzot, which is on the 15th. They merge on the night of the 15th, between the 14th and the 15th. Because korbanot, when you bring a korban, the korbanot, the night follows the day. We all are familiar in the Jewish calendar how the day follows the night. Every date begins at night, right? So tomorrow night will be Shabbat. It's Friday night, but it's Shabbat already. That's how the Jewish calendar works, except in the Beit HaMikdash. In the Beit HaMikdash, all korbanot are brought during the day, and any continuation in terms of eating the korban, in terms of putting the animal on the entrails onto the mizbeach, etc. That's the following night. So in the Beit HaMikdash, in korbanot, night follows day. In holidays and in the terms of the calendar, the day follows the night. So when I look at the night of the 15th, the night between the 14th and the 15th, so it's both. It's the night of eating the Korban Pesach. The Yom Pesach was on the 14th, and it's the beginning of this new idea called Chag HaMatzot. And so the Ibn Ezra says, Lo tziva lishmor Chag HaMatzot ata b'Mitzrayim. This command that 7 days you're going to have a holiday in the Chag HaMatzot, that's something which is new. That's something that's only going to happen basically in Eretz Yisrael, because until then, and he says that when they are Gam lo bamidbar, very next words, Gam lo bamidbar, you didn't have it. See, ein lahem lechem. There was limited flour, if at all. They were eating man. So how did they? So they couldn't keep a Chag HaMatzot in the midbar. I assume man, unless it was kitniot, so man was kosher lePesach automatically. So it wasn't, because it wasn't bread. But so Chag HaMatzot is an element which the Torah, which God is telling Moshe, is going to happen once you reach the land. But right now you're still in Chag HaPesach, and within Chag HaPesach you have matzah, because it's al matzot u'morim yochlu. You have the Korban Pesach that has the matzah. So it's very confusing. I see matzah as part of this element of the holiday, or even a separate holiday with a Korban Pesach, and I see matzah becoming the highlight of a new holiday, a 7-day holiday called Chag HaMatzot. So how exactly does that work? This, by the way, this dichotomy is really brought to bear in the Mishnah as opposed to the Haggadah. The Haggadah, which we're going to be reading, is based on the Mishnah, but let's take a look at a very important difference between the Mishnah and the Haggadah. The Mishnah says, Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer. Right? We're all familiar with this Mishnah from the Haggadah. Rabban Gamliel Haya Omer, Kol Shelo Amar Shlosha Dvarim Elu BePesach, Lo Yatsa Yidei Chavata. So anyone who doesn't say these 3 mitzvot, mention them at Pesach, you haven't fulfilled you have not fulfilled your obligation. What is the obligation? Hopefully we'll reach that in a few minutes. But the idea here is that you have to talk about Korban Pesach. You have to talk about matzah. You have to talk about maror. Great. So now what do we say? So the first line, Pesach al Shuma, Shepasach HaMakom. Why do we eat the Korban Pesach? Because God will say, passed over our homes, our fathers' homes. Okay. What about matzah? Matzah is al shum shenig alu avoteinu b'Mitzrayim, because our fathers were redeemed in Egypt. Now, if you don't recall what we say in the Haggadah, I'll show you right down here. Skipping this a little bit, doing a little bit different order because of the time constraints. Daniela Adeza Shayeshli. Daniela?
10, 10, 20, 20, 10, 25.
Okay.
We'll make the break a little shorter.
Okay. So the matzah in the Haggadah, remember, we had just said, why do we read matzah? Why do we eat matzah? Shum shenig alu avoteinu b'Mitzrayim. Let's see what we say in the Haggadah. What we say in the Haggadah is, al shum shelo he speak b'tzeikam shel avotenu lachmitz ad shenigla aleihem hamelach hakadosh baruch hu. In other words, this is not a text. What I just highlighted, that's not found in the Mishnah. The Mishnah, it's very simple. They were redeemed in Egypt, and that's why we eat the matzah. Now, suddenly we start talking about this in the Seder. We start talking about the second part that happened later, that the of why we eat the matzah, because the dough didn't rise the following morning when they were being rushed out of Egypt. Excuse me. What's being said here? Okay, so the Netziv, in his commentary to the Torah, has a very not in Shmot, actually, he says it in Sefer Dvarim, but it's I think a very poignant and incisive comment. He says the following: Mizman Pesach, when the Korban Pesach was being brought, Haya Ikar Zikaron Shel Yetziat Mitzrayim B'Neis Pesach Hashem. So then the primary association for the night was that God passed over. That's why we bring we brought the korban. However, ba'achilat matzah rak lo dia shega'al otanu Hashem. The matzah was auxiliary. Was just an addition to the Korban Pesach. So I take a look at when I'm bringing the Korban Pesach, I look at the matzah as being an auxiliary part of the larger mitzvah of the Korban. Aval bizman hazeh, he continues in the second paragraph. In today, when we don't have a Korban Pesach in our Seder, so then achilat matzah b'layla rishona ba'al lamdeinu inyan achipazon. So now, when we mention this, the Pesach, which we don't point to because it's just the zroa, it's just the shank bone. We're not really having the Korban Pesach, unfortunately. Maybe Bezrat Hashem in a few weeks' time, who knows? Bezrat Hashem, we will have the Korban. But until now, the last 1900 years or so, we haven't had it. So then the theme has switched. There was the theme originally of the matzah as being simply a part of the Korban Pesach, and now without the Korban Pesach, the matzah takes on new meaning or an additional meaning in order for it to be something independent. So this is in terms of, if you will, the way that the Haggadah phrases it, but this is expressed already also in the Halacha as well. The Gemara asks the following. The Gemara says, Rabbi says, Matza bizman hazeh deoraita umaror derabanan. Excuse me. The matzah is a mitzvah deoraita today, whereas maror is only rabbinic. Why is there a difference between matzah and maror? So the Gemara explains that when it comes to maror, it says al matzot umarim yochluhu. So you'll eat the Korban Pesach together with the matzah umaror. So only when you have the Korban Pesach, you have the maror. That's in terms of the maror. So the Gemara says, matzah nami. That's also the case with regard to the matzah. So the Gemara says, no, because matzah, the pasuk returns and says, ba'erev tochlu matzot. The matzah is mentioned independently. That's Rava. There is another opinion in the Gemara. The other opinion in the Gemara says, Rav Achar bar Yaakov Amar, echad zeh ve'echad zeh d'Rabbanan. Even today, the mitzvah of matzah is only rabbinic. And he explains that other pasuk of Ba'erev tochlu matzot is being said when that it's when there is a korban pesach. It's a question of if we're, let's say, during the time of the Beit HaMikdash. I don't want to go too detail because I don't have the time now. But if a person is unable to bring the korban pesach, he's far away from the mikdash, he is tameh, right? He's impure, he can't bring the korban pesach. That person has a mitzvah to eat the matzah and the maror, even though he's not bringing the korban pesach. But the korban pesach is being brought by Am Yisrael. So matzah and maror, even if I'm eating them separately from the meat of the korban pesach, they are still connected to the korban, because a korban is being brought, not a korban. Hundreds of thousands of korbanot are being brought. And so I connect to my place in Am Yisrael by eating my matzah and my maror, even though I can't bring a korban pesach. So there are these two different shitot. According to the second shita, Rav Acha bar Yaakov, matzah never leaves the orbit of korban pesach. So if there is no korban pesach being brought anywhere in the world because of the korban, so then maror is derabanan, which Rava agreed to, and matzah as well is derabanan. But Rava, and this is the way that we paskin halacha, we follow the opinion of Rava. So Rava says, no, matzah has independent significance, and the independent significance is what we said earlier, is the significance of the idea of that the dough didn't rise. So that same matzah, by virtue of having those two separate themes, in other words, every korban, I should have mentioned this earlier, every korban shlamim, every korban todah, Thanksgiving korbanot, are eaten with bread. So eating the matzah here isn't so extraordinary, because other korbanot are eaten with matzah as well. The extraordinary element, if anything, is the maror. But so I could say I don't have a korban, so therefore I don't have the mitzvah of matzah, the way I don't have the mitzvah of maror, and indeed that's what Rav Acha says. But Rava, and presumably our Haggadah, by changing the text of the Mishnah, by adding this whole idea that the dough wasn't able to rise, and that's why we're eating the matzah now, and that's why I point to it at my Seder. So that is a nod to the fact that the second element is an independent element, and that independent element has halachic significance, and that's why it's a mitzvah d'oraita to eat matzah even today. And it, of course, has thematic significance, and that's why when we speak about the matzah at the Seder, we don't talk about it as being a part of the korban pesach. We speak of it as being a mitzvah, an independent mitzvah in its own right. Of course, the matzah has another theme as well. The matzah, so we've now spoken about the matzah as being part of the korban pesach. We've spoken about the matzah as being independent, and because the dough rose. But we start our Seder with a different statement entirely. We start the Seder by saying, halachma anya, diachalu avatana ba'ara de Mitzrayim. Right? This is the bread of affliction that our fathers ate in Egypt. So that is a new theme. Whereas until now, we talked about matzah being part of a korban, which is the beginning, of course, of the redemption. We talk about matzah as being something independent because the dough didn't rise as they left Egypt, a separate idea, which according to the halacha that we just learned, is able to generate a independent chiyuv, an independent obligation to eat matzah, and maybe that's what the Ibn Ezra, getting back to the Ibn Ezra that we spoke about before, his understanding of the Chag HaMatzot, right? So maybe when we, from the Ibn Ezra's perspective, when there's a Korban Pesach, the matzah that we eat with the Korban, that is primarily the, I'll say it's two themes. It's the theme of that we said before of part of the Korban, and it's also the beginning of this new Chag of Chag HaMatzot. So I'm sort of eating the same piece of bread with two separate thematic connections. But now we have a third thematic connection. Lachma Anya, where does this come from? So this comes from a pasuk in Sefer Dvarim. Here in Sefer Dvarim, the Torah says, Lo tochlu alav chametz, shivat yamim tochal alav matzot, lechem oni. So without getting into it's talking about the Korban Pesach, and without getting into the problem, what does it mean that you'll eat it for 7 days when we know that Korban Pesach is only the first night? But that's not my problem at the moment. Here, it's tochal alav matzot lechem oni. We have this idea that the matzah is a lechem oni, bread of affliction. And the bread of affliction, as we say explicitly in the Seder, is the affliction was when we were in Egypt. And here, the Avudram has a very nice explanation for this notion. And he points out, he just said that in his own time, he's living in the 13th century, and he says the following. He mentions, I'm not familiar with who this person is. Upirish Harav Yosef HaZovi b'Shem Ben Ezra. I don't think that it is Ibn Ezra, who we think of, because to the best of my knowledge, he never was a captive in India. But when this Ben Ezra was imprisoned in India, Hayu ma'achilin oto lechem matzah, v'lo natnu lo la'olam chametz. So, as part of the prison fare that he had to eat, so all they would give him was matzah. I'm assuming that it wasn't what we call matzah, the Ashkenazic matzah, the matzah of the cracker-like matzah. I assume that it's a type of pita or lafa. But the idea is that the technology and the investment of time and energy and resources in terms of making a nice fluffy loaf. So that is something that the slaves or the prisoners in India in the 14th century, that's something that you're just not going to get, right? You're going to get the cheapest, most basic food in order that you're going to be able to do the work that you need to do, that the master needs you to do. And so the bread of affliction, that's the matzah. Now, it could very well be based on this, that the reason why that the Korban Pesach, just to merge these two ideas, the reason why the Korban Pesach was eaten specifically with matzah, even though, remember, they don't have the theme yet of leaving Egypt, and so they could have asked, why are we eating matzah? Why can't we eat any other bread? And the answer that might have been given is because that the Torah or God in this moment of the Korban Pesach is symbolically taking the bread of affliction and turning it into the bread of Geula. Remember what Rabbi Gamliel had said originally, why are we eating the matzah now with the Korban Pesach? Because our forefathers were redeemed. But there is an irony and a great, but in a positive sense, that we have this irony. Here we are taking the very bread that is symbolic of the enslavement, and we are turning it into the bread of Geula. It doesn't happen, by the way, with the maror. The maror remains always going to be symbol of the um, a symbol of the enslavement in Egypt, in the servitude, but the matzah is transformed. It retains its original meaning of the lechem oni, of the bread of affliction, but it's also the bread of Geulah. And that bread of Geulah we've seen is in two steps. It's in the bread of Geulah together with the Korban Pesach, as well as the bread of Geulah independently as they leave Egypt on the following morning. Now, this theme of the lechem oni, the bread of affliction, finds its way into the Seder on a halachic way, on a halachic level as well. We're all familiar with it. We're going to break the matzah in the middle. Now, that idea is found in the Gemara. The Gemara says the following: Amar Rav Papa, Hakol modim b'Pesach shemeniach prusa betoch shlema uvotzeya. The Gemara in Brachot here, which I'm reading, is dealing with the mitzvah of Lechem Mishnah all week long, all year long, on Shabbat and Chag. And Rav Papa says, on Pesach, though, we don't have two whole loaves. We make sure that one of the loaves is broken. And the reason is because lechem oni ktiv, it is the bread of affliction. And so how do I symbolize that? I have I have a scrap of bread. I don't even, it's not only a question that it's not chametz. After all, on the Seder, I don't have any chametz there at all. But it's not only that it's not chametz, but that it's not even a whole loaf. So that is being used as the symbolism. Now, in this, we have the two shitot, which I don't, because I want to get to another aspect. I only have 5 minutes left. That the Rambam and others, briskers to this day, only have 2 matzot. They only use 2 matzot. They don't use 3 matzot. It's a question. Is it 2 matzot from lechem Mishnah plus the lechem oni? That's what most people do, and that's why you start with 3 matzot and then you break one of those matzot. And you have them. You have, as it were, the lechem Mishnah together with the broken piece, or is the lechem Mishnah itself impacted, which is the way that the Rambam understood it? You only have 2 matzot, right? I'll just read the Rambam for you, so you can see that it's the Rambam and the Vilna Gaon, and after the Vilna Gaon, the briskers follow this. I was at a Seder, I was also to be at a Seder at the Lichtensteins about, I guess, well over 40 years ago, 45 years ago. And at the Seder, so Rav Lichtenstein had 3 matzot on his Seder plate, and Dr. Lichtenstein, Mrs. Tova Lichtenstein, following the custom of her father, had 2 matzot. So these minhagim are are still there, but the Rambam says explicitly, "Lokeach shnei rikikin v'cholek echad mehem umeniach parus l'toch shalem." So the Rambam says you take 2 loaves and you break one. There aren't 3 loaves, but the idea, whether it's the way that most of us have 3 matzot with an additional broken loaf, or it's 2 matzot with one of them being broken, the idea is the same, namely that we take this theme of oni, this theme of poverty, and we introduce it into the Seder. The final aspect, which I want to talk about here, and in all of this I could expand much more, but unfortunately I don't have the time to do so. Is the drasha on the pasuk, because if you take a look at the pasuk again, let's look back at the pasuk in Devarim, the way that it's written. And let's see here we go. the pasuk says, right? Take a look here again, pasuk gimel. Lo tochal alav chametz shivat yamim tochal alav matzot lechem oni, but it's not spelled with the vav, as in most words in the Torah are chaser. They the fact that the vav is missing here is not particularly noteworthy. However, it gives us an opportunity for a drasha. And the drasha, which is already found in the Gemara, if my computer would help me here. So the drasha that's found in the Gemara is what's stated here. Amar Shmuel, lechem oni. Again, however, it's ketiv, it's written, lechem sha'onin alav dvarim. But you can read it as the lechem of the ani, you can read it as the lechem that you are oneh, that you answer, that you speak to. So this is the idea that the matzah is a tool in the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. Now, remember back to the Mishnah that we had said that was the source of Rabbi Gamliel's Mishnah. Kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach. Whoever doesn't mention these three things on Pesach, lo yatsa yedei chavato. You do not fulfill your obligation. Which obligation? So here there happens to be a fascinating machloket between the Rambam and the Ramban. The Rambam says that the lo yatsa yedei chavato dvarim elu kulan nikrain haggadah. In other words, which mitzvah didn't you fulfill if I don't talk about the matzah? Which mitzvah did I not fulfill if I don't talk about the Pesach? I don't fulfill the mitzvah of the of Haggadah, of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. If I didn't use multimedia tools, because that's basically what lechem oni means. Onim alav dvarim harbe. You have the matzah, if you will, for matzah's sake. But you also have the matzah, and even for matzah's sake, we already saw three different themes. But you also have the matzah as a tool in order to tell the story. And if you don't employ the mitzvot of the diet, the Rambam says, if you don't employ those mitzvot correctly, so then there's something lacking in the story that you told. You could have told, Ad ba'u talmideihem v'amru rabotenu higia zman tfilat shma shel shacharit. You could be speaking about Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim all night long, but if you didn't use the matzah, you didn't use the maror, etc., as being tools to explain the story and to flesh it out, if you're literally to flesh it out, if you're talking about the Korban Pesach, if you haven't done that, so then there's something lacking in the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. The Ramban, on the other hand, and with this we'll close, the Ramban understands it in the other way. The Ramban doesn't address it directly at the Seder. It's a comment that he talks about with regard to, without getting into the context of Birkat Torah, but he says the following, that he says, Ki yotzeba, shelo kol shelo amar shlosha dvarim elu b'Pesach, lo yatsa yedei chavato, v'lo sheyeh tzarich lachzor v'lachol Pesach matzah maror. Because you didn't fulfill your obligation of what? Of the matzah, of the achilat matzah. But he says it's not so terrible. Meaning that lechatchila, you, in order to fulfill matzah in its fullest sense, so you have to talk about it as well. But if you don't talk about it, you don't have to go back and eat more matzah. It's the idea is that the ideal obligation of matzah, the ideal obligation of maror, the ideal obligation of Korban Pesach is only fulfilled by the statement that you make as to explain why you're eating it. In other words, here the idea, if we're focusing on the matzah, the idea of lechem oni, so it is the Rambam would say it's a tool for the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim. It's a tool for me to be able to say the Haggadah, and I have to bring the tool into the Haggadah in order to make that Sipur a more complete retelling of the story. But the Ramban is saying, no, if I'm eating if I'm eating a korban, if I'm eating the matzah, and I don't understand why I'm doing it from the perspective of the background of Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, so I might have been fulfilled the technical eating of through the eating I've fulfilled the technical mitzvah, but I haven't really gotten to the heart of the matter. I need to explain why I'm doing this particular mitzvah in order for the mitzvah to be complete. So here we've seen, just to very quickly recap, we've seen different ways of understanding this matzah. We have the matzah as being part of the korban. We have matzah as being, and as part of the korban, it is also to take the lechem oni, to take the bread of affliction, and to turn it into the bread of geula. But without the korban, it remains the lechem oni alone of slavery. And the additional aspect, which is, or now the third, is the idea of the matzah of geula when they left Egypt, lo yachlu lihitmamea, and that's what we are saying in our Haggadah when we don't have the Korban Pesach, but yet we remain with the mitzvah deoraita of achilat matzah. And finally, the idea of lechem oni, the lechem she'onim alav dvarim harbe, that the matzah is a tool for Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim, the way the Rambam understood it, or that the Sipur Yetziat Mitzrayim becomes a key element in the fulfillment of matzah itself. We should all be zocher. This year, we have a few weeks, Bezrat Hashem, to bring the Korban Pesach, to fulfill all of the mitzvot in the best possible way with Binyan Beit HaMikdash b'meira v'yameinu, and whether we're zocha to that or not this year, we should all have a Chag Kasher v'Sameach.